These are two particular piskaot from the writings of Rabbeinu Agadol, Agon Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Kohen Kook, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. האיש הזה היה גדול עד כדי כך שאי אפשר לתאר. I'm just saying that על הדרך, in passing. And Rav Kook himself knew that there would be generations in the future before many of his ideas and writings, etc., would be appreciated as they should be. He writes this explicitly about himself. Here we have two statements. The first is from both from the work or the collected writings called Shemunah Kavatzim. The first is from Kovetz Het, the last, Siman Resh Kav Het, and this is very important because some people claim that certain writings of Rav Kook, which he wrote, certain things that he wrote when he was studying Chutz La'aretz, before he came on to Eretz Yisrael in Tel Aviv, Samech Daled, 1904 Leminyana, he expressed himself in certain ways, and he had a certain attitude towards Rishaim, Kofarim, etc., which he later recanted. And therefore you shouldn't read those things. And that's why his son Rav Kook did not see any value in reprinting many things that he wrote in an earlier period of his life. It wasn't that Rav Kook was so old when he came on to Eretz Yisrael, he was Sachakol 39. But certain things he wrote in his 20s or his early 30s or what have you. So I wanted to demonstrate with this first piska, this claim is at least with regards to this particular topic that we're about to read, is incorrect, because this Kovetz Het, Resh Kav Het, Kovetz Het was written when Rav Kook was in Switzerland during the First World War. Or in London, and I think in London between the years Tel Resh, I think Ayin Waw and Tel Resh Ayin Tet or something like that. In other words, 1916 to 1919. So this is many years, something like it could be 15 or 18 years, or even not 18 years, but 15 years after Rav Kook came to Eretz Yisrael, and he wrote the following. In other words, to claim that what we're about to read is the Rav Kook of Chutz La'aretz, and he didn't think this any longer, that is not true. That is clearly not true. This is towards the end of the Shemunah Kavatzim, written towards the end of the First World War, or even after the First World War. He writes as follows: Sinath harish'ah kishehi amuka ugdola. Hating evil, the concept. Tzricha lavo b'tchilat b'riyatha yachad im sinath harish'ah. A person has to be first taught to hate not just the Risha but also the Rishaim, those who do evil, those who promote evil, not just the evil itself. רק אחר כך היא מתמתקת על ידי כוח הדעת ומתבררת עד שהיא עומדת על ניקיונה האצילי. שאין כי אם שנאת הרשעה לבדה. A person can reach the point, and one should try and achieve that level, eventually, of hating the evil without hating the evildoers. והנושאים שלה שהם הרשעים בעצמם מתמלאים עליהם רחמים ויתמו חטאים ולא חוטאים. Okay. So Rav Kook is discussing how we should train and educate people, certainly young people. אבל אם מתחילת בריאתה תבוא בצורתה האידיאלית, if a person from the outset tries to convince oneself that I should only hate the Rish'a but not the Rishaim, לכוון את מהותה רק על השנאה של הרשעה המופשטת, לעולם לא תעשה אל הפועל בכוחה אפילו בתור שנאת הרשעה. Even hating the evil in it as a concept, a person will not achieve that level, that understanding, that insight. כי חיסרון השנאה אל הרשעים יטשטש את השנאה של הרשעה עצמה. ואז כל אוצר הטוב מונח הוא בסכנה גדולה. And this is very dangerous. This can lead to great danger and spiritual danger, obviously. וזה היה מקום המכשול של נפילים רבים שנפלו מפני שהשתמשו בתחילת הווייתה של שנאת הרשעה במידה העשילית, והיעדר שנאת הרשעים נתהפכה אחר כך לאהבתם. And if one does not hate רשעים, at least at the beginning, then one will end up liking them. ומתוך אהבת הרשעים נפלו הם עצמם באהבת הרשע עצמה. על כן מוכרחת היא המחשבה הראשונה להיות בתכונת מידת הדין, ואחר כך מידת הרחמים באה וממתקת אותה ושיתופה. I think the idea is understood. Rav Kook says the same thing in another couple of places, in Shmona Kvatzim and elsewhere. This is one example. And this was many, many years after Rav Kook had been in Yafo and been in Eretz Yisrael, and the claim that Rav Kook only thought this and only had such an attitude, or taught such an attitude, that such an attitude was correct, was only when he was much younger. That is plainly not true, as this Piskav proves. I would say that on this issue, the Haredi world is much more metukan than the Dati Lumi world. The Dati Lumi world, I believe, has gone astray to some, at least partly because of this matter, this issue here. In other words, not training the younger generation to hate not only Risha but also Rishaim, and to make excuses for Rishaim always, and not be critical of them, and not. And Rav Kook also writes elsewhere that the hatred towards Rishaim is essentially a self-defense mechanism, to distance yourself from something which is dangerous, something like it's a disease, it's contagious, and it is. So this is an important lesson which needs to be taken to heart.
How would this practically look? Like one would believe that Rishaim are not to be hated, but he would at the same time teach his kids to hate them. Isn't that a bit hard to internalize and still?
First of all, you're assuming that the father, the parent, will always already have achieved this level of not having to hate the shame and only to have to hate the Risha per se. And I would tell you that the vast majority of people will never reach that madriga. Rav Kook was in his own very, very lofty world, and he knew there is such a madriga, and it's a wonderful thing to aspire to. Is it something that most people will achieve, can even aspire to achieve? I would tell you no. For most people it's not a practical aspiration, it's not and therefore it's not an educational approach that can be used for the general public. Individuals, very unique individuals here and there may achieve some higher level of perception and understanding and insight, and they will know what to do and how to do it and how to deal with this or that situation. But most people, certainly young people, have to be taught to be very disdainful and very negative, shall we say, towards a sinah. It doesn't mean you have to be burning necessarily with the passionate hatred for this or that person, although that may also be called for in certain situations, such as those who clearly, by their actions and their words, see themselves as, and practically speaking, act in fact, indeed, as enemies of the Jewish people, and cooperate with and ally themselves with the enemies of the Jewish people. I think it's correct to hate such people mamash. Alom mesanecha Adonai esna u'mitkomemecha et kotat, says the pasuk in Tehillim. Correct. The Malbim there explains mesanecha is not just sonecha. Mesanecha, those who cause others to hate, right? The hasni. So people who in other words, as I think I explained on another occasion, if we take what happened 2 years ago on Yom Kippur in Tel Aviv, if you recall. So there were many people in Tel Aviv, despite the fact that it was Yom Kippur, were sitting at home, munching on their ham sandwiches, watching television, watching Netflix, whatever they do or don't do. And many of them could be reasonably described as, to one extent or another, being kethi nokot shenishbu. But they were brought up to think that the Torah is silly, it's old hat, it's old-fashioned, it's not, no one takes it seriously, and this is therefore what you do on Yom Kippur. But they didn't feel that it was necessary to pull themselves out of their armchairs and trouble themselves to go to that particular park where many other Jews who wanted to daven in this park according by law, and they had all the necessary permits, etc. They didn't find it necessary to go and disturb those people or attack them even physically, as some people did. They just said to themselves, "It's not for me. That's what they want to do. But go ahead. I think you're crazy, fine, whatever. But I'm not going to get in your way." So you can say this person is a rasha, you can say he's a tinok shenishba or kethinok shenishba, you can say all sorts of things, but he didn't make a big effort he didn't do anything to ensure that this tefillah would not take place. But there were some people, and not 2 or 3, but hundreds and thousands, in fact, who found it necessary and were motivated to trouble themselves and bother themselves to leave the comfort of their home and leave behind their ham sandwich or whatever it was and go to that particular park and make sure that this tefillah didn't take place, and even at the risk of if necessary by violence. There's a difference between those two people. One, you can say arushaim, maybe they don't know what they're doing, maybe they're mshochachim v'lo mazidim. You could say all sorts of things. Again, Rambam didn't invent this concept of kethinok shenishba. Chazal didn't mention such a concept. They speak about a tinok shenishba, which means literally a Jewish child that was taken captive by goyim and brought up as a goy, and then he discovers when he's 20 that, oh, I'm really Jewish. That's a tinok shenishba. Rambam says Karaites brought up by their parents as Karaites are kethinok shenishba. They're similar. They can be compared to such a person. All right, that's a chidush of the Rambam. You can take it or leave it. It's up to you. But the Rambam is the author of that chidush. Interestingly, the Chazon Ish agrees with what the Rambam says on that issue, and I think the Rav Kook does not necessarily agree. Here in Igroth HaRa'aya, there's a very interesting Igereth here of Rav Kook. There's a difference between soneim or rashaim and mesaneh Hashem. Halo mesanech Adonai Yisna is already a high madriga. So the Harav Malbim explains in his Perush and Tehillim over there. And I tend to accept and agree with that understanding and that diuk in the lashon. So when Rav Kook writes this piska, many years after he arrived in Eretz Yisrael, many years after he said many other things about the various kinds of rashaim, whatever he thought about various kinds of evildoers or kofarim or people Mahalolei Shabbat prefer Hesya or what have you, whatever he thought about them, he here tells you that it's necessary to educate people to look in a very negative fashion at such people, to view them in a very negative light, because otherwise you will, by some process of osmosis or contagion, you will be affected, and you will cease to truly oppose and be revulsed by their actions and their way of life and how they live and what they say and what they think. Yes.
We see, in fact, I don't know what the statistics are nowadays as far as how many Jews are going off the derech in the national religious versus the Haredi world. I think it's more in the Dati-Leumi world by quite a bit. But what my perception is that many of the Dati-Leumi kids that go off the derech have this very parv attitude when they look towards the Chiloni world. They don't really see much of a distinction between their population and their population, which exactly fits into what you're saying. In other words, they end up, whenever they do end up going to the army or out into the greater world, well, they didn't really see a big difference between themselves and Chiloni in any case.
You're absolutely correct.
And they can't imagine that Chilonim are possibly not going to Olam Haba or not the same place, and therefore they're not comfortable with the whole lack of, and they end up becoming Chiloni.
There's a tremendous amount of truth in what you say. The statistics are unfortunately well known. Depending on the kind of Dati society or community that to which you refer, it goes from roughly 20% to 51%. The phenomenon of Datim becoming Datlashim in the Dati Lumi world, Ishka Merkazita Statistika, right? The Israeli Statistics Bureau. So they have official figures which they check and they redo every year. You can read their statistical analysis, and for these purposes they ask all kinds of questions. And I think their information is probably the best. Because they divide the Haredi world, they divide the religious people into two groups, Haredi and Dati. And they divide each of those groups into three subgroups. The Haredim are Hasidi, Litai, and Sfaradi. As I am aware, their statistics for people leaving Yahadut in the Hasidic world is 2%, or 2 to 3%. In the Litai world, 5%, and in the Sfaradi Shas world or whatever. Although Shas is a very inaccurate and difficult to. It's an imprecise definition. Some people vote Shas and go to Beitar Yerushalayim soccer matches on Shabbat, so it's hard to know. But let's say Sfaradi Haredi, the percentage they give is 8%. All right. Now, you may think that's not very much, but it actually is. It's 80 people out, 8% is 80 out of 1,000. It's a lot of people. 33% is 30 out of 1,000. It's not a small number. But in the Dati world, then they divide that also into three subsets. Torani Leumi, mainstream Dati Leumi, and Dati Liberali, whatever that means. The figures they give for that, if I'm not mistaken, are as follows. 21% for the Torani Leumi, which is already much more than double in the Haredi world. 30-something% in the mainstream, and that's exactly what Rav Eli Sadan wrote already 5-6 years ago in Makor Rishon newspaper, Erev Rosh Hashanah. I remember reading it, and he said that a shlish in the Tilumi world, a shlish are going off the derech. That's what he said then. I think it's actually higher, but all right, that more or less is what the Lamas also says. And the third group, the liberal so-called, or what might be referred to in other circles as modern or very modern Orthodox or what have you, the Tilite, 51%. 51%. I don't think you need any further clearer proof that what Rav Kook writes here is correct and necessary and essential. And you have to educate according to this line. And Rav Kook understood this very well. What Rav Kook writes in a number of places about how he relates to this kind of person and those people who think this and think that, that's from an intellectual, spiritual, philosophical perspective. I mean, and also halachic perspective, but not in terms of how you educate the tzibur and young people. I want to quote from a Igeret of Rav Kook. This is Igeret Kaf, on page Kaf Aleph in Igrot HaRaya, volume 1. And he is referring, this is in the wake of a letter that he wrote publicly denouncing Eliezer ben Yehuda. Eliezer ben Yehuda, the famous Balshan and a genius in terms of Lashon HaKodesh, which he didn't think was Kadosh, but he was a genius in that regard, but he was also a Rasha Gadol. And Rav Kook refers to him in Igeret Yod Het on page Tel Zayin. This individual, Eliezer ben Yehuda, wrote as follows. He says, and he doesn't just speak about himself, he speaks about all the people that he thinks agree with him. He says, Rak ba'alei havad shel hipus hata'im, that's what he calls it. Lo panu oref la'avar shelana. In other words, we've all discarded the Yahadut and everything from the past. Anu kulanu paninu oref la'avar v'zot hilathenu v'tifartenu. That's what Eliezer ben Yehuda writes in a public letter that he published. Where did he publish this? In the Hashkafa, a newspaper, Hashkafa Gilion Memcheth, and the year we're talking about. What year is this? This is Torah Samech Hey, 1905 Liminyanan, a year after Rav Kook came to Eretz Yisrael. Rav Kook was outraged by this statement. He says explicitly why. He says, if he was only describing himself, this is what I think, this is what I feel, so you're just a shkotz, you think this, fine, I'm not even going to spend time talking about it, what you think, you don't. But if you speak for the entire tzibur, that we've all, hishlachnu achrei gavenu et haTorah, that's a Hilul Hashem atzum, and he refers to him later in this Migeret as ha'evar ha'meduldal hazeh. Right? That's how he refers to Eliezer ben Yehuda. I can also tell you for a fact, I know this for an absolute fact, I have it written in my computer, written down by people who saw this. When Eliezer ben Yehuda died, and Rav Kook was informed, and he was asked if he wants to go to the Levaya, he said, B'shum panim v'ofen lo yelech la'Levaya shelo. Those were his words. I have it written down from an Edre'iyah. Okay? So Rav Kook was outraged by this, and he wrote this long igeret, which is a full, basically almost 3 pages long, in which he takes him to task for this, and he says that it's a chutzpah lo mitzuya, that when a person says such a thing, not b'shmo but b'shem kulam. All right, and then he wrote another letter when he was asked about what he wrote in this letter to someone called Rav Moshe Dr. Zaido. And he writes here on page Kaf Aleph, Igeret Kaf, he says something very interesting here, which we have to, it's worth quoting. It's not here, but it connects directly to what it says here. He says, Ulenyan dina, when it comes to halacha, da, she'af al pi she'isur gamur v'hol irahu, afilu mi she'mistapek u'meharher al divrei emunah shlema, a person who even has doubts about emunat Yisrael, that's a terrible thing. Mikol makom, lo masinu shedanu hazal din epikorus, ki im ala kofer, dahainu machlit behefech. In other words, if a person says, I know that Hashem doesn't exist, chas v'shalom, I'm a complete atheist, it's nonsense, and davar kazeh. Not that I'm not sure, I cannot see how you can prove it, I'm not convinced, I don't know, that's an agnostic. But a person who says, I know there's no such thing, and he says it, b'kol gadol, and he spreads such a view, that's an apikoros gamur, and that's what Chazal refers to. Not someone says, ani lo yadeh b'diuk, ani mesupak. That's something else. וההחלטה של ההפך אי אפשר שתימצא כלל בישראל בין שום אדם שלא יהיה רשע גמור ומשקר במזיד. In other words, how do you know God doesn't exist? You have to be a shakran. If you say, I know there's no God, how do you know? You don't know. You'd like to think there isn't, or you're not sure, but you can't claim that you know. If your claim is a ta'anath wadai, says Rav Kook, and this is in Torah Samech, Siwan Torah Samech Hey, he says, a person who says that, hu rasha gamur mashaker b'mezid, because he can't possibly know. Ki harisha yoter gdola lo tuchal ki im lahatil dofi shel safek lahalushei hadeot. A person may be an idiot, or he's not very wise, or he doesn't know, or he's tempted by all kinds of reasons to think it's better for me to think that there isn't, therefore I can do what I like. Whatever it is, as Chazal say, so there's reasons. A person always can have a reason, an excuse why it's a good idea not to think so. Says Rav Kook. Which means מורידים ולא מעלים. That's what Rav Kook is discussing. He doesn't actually use those words, but it's obvious, that's what we're discussing. What does that mean, בכל הדינים המפורשים? ואין כאן טענת ליבו או נשוא כלל. It's not honest. If a person says, I'm not convinced, I don't know, I've heard this argument, I've heard that argument, there's this proof, there's that proof, אני לא יודע. That's he's a tipesh, he's a halush da'at, but he's not a kofer b'muchlat, because he doesn't say, I don't know. I'm not saying I know for anything for sure. But a person who claims such a thing for sure, you can't say he's anus. That's mezid. It's like halom esanecha Hashem esna. If these people were honest, הייתה תמיד טוענת טענת ספק, והיו מבררים לה בנקל ספקותיה. אבל היא משקרת בזדון. Such people are שקרנים. וטוענת טענת ודאי. בשעה שאפילו ליותר חלושים בדעת אי אפשר כלל שתבוא כי אם למידת ספק. והרי היא עסוקה, in other words, such כפירה, היא עסוקה ברשע של רדיפה בעזות מצח. רדיפה של מה? של התורה. That's what I said before about the people in Tel Aviv. Those people who stayed at home watching reruns of, Yair Lapid's TV program on Yom Kippur, or watching reruns of Lo Yodea Ma, whilst munching their tray food, whatever it is, אז הם רשעים, הם טיפשים, והם אולי גם מסכנים גדולים, בוודאי חלק מהם מסכנים גדולים. And אפשר באמת אולי לדון חלקם הגדול כתינוקות שנשבו. But those who go out of their way, and it's the thing that motivates them, everything in their life is centered about how to fight the Torah and fight people who believe in Hashem, and to the extent that I won't even allow them to conduct a minyan over there in the park. Ze rishut gemura, says Rav Kook. He says, Harehi asuka beresha shel redifa ba'azut mesah. Al ken hi hayevet kol adinim. He says, Al ken hi hayevet kol adinim shebidei adam u'idei shamayim. לפי הערך של המכשילה שהיא עושה. משמע, לפי הבנתי, the Rav Kook here is not agreeing with the Rambam, or not agreeing with the Chazon Ish, not saying in a blanket kind of statement that all such people should be judged l'chav zchut in some way, because those who are osekim b'redifat haTorah, as he says here, these people who claim Tanath Wadai, that the Torah is shum davar, and there's no God and nothing to listen to, and din ve'en dayan, and I know this to be the case. Tanat wadai, hasu shalom, harei hi asuka v'resha shel redifa ba'azut mesah. Al ken hi hayevet kol adinim shebidei adam u'bidei shamayim. That doesn't sound to me exactly like what the Chazon Ish writes in Yerodea Siman Gimel. That it's not Siman Gimel, maybe Beth. Is that written here? No, it's a Gimel that I wrote here. Yerodea Siman Gimel. That there the Chazon Ish makes a more blanket statement that the Reshaim, the Dor Shalanu, they're basically Katinu Koshin Ishbu, something along those lines. I don't remember the exact Lashon. This Rav Kook's words here are harsher than what the Chazon Ish writes over there. Just one second. Then he goes on to say, Pirtei advarim muvan shetzrechim arichut gdola. Okay, beseder. Okay, we understand that. That's true. And the solution, he says, is b'chol ma sheyeh yoter davek b'tamidei chachamim dorashei Elohim be'emet, ken yit'aleh ma'ala ma'ala liyot memuleh be'emunah shel chosen chokhmah v'da'at, etc., etc. All right, so you see that Rav Kook knew how to speak rather harshly of certain categories of people. And in terms of a general line of chinuch, this is what he recommended, and this is when he wrote these words here, either towards the end of or after the First World War. This is Rav Kook at the peak of his powers. At this point, he's in his what is he? Tafresh Ayin Hey. He was 50, so he's over 50. And the most prolific and fertile period of Rav Kook in terms of his writings is exactly this period, between the period when he arrived in Eretz Yisrael, Tafresh Samach Daled, and perhaps maybe the next 20 years, but actually probably less, more like the next 10 to 15 years. That was when Rav Kook he had more time, and he was able to, and he had the energy and whatever, and the focus to write many of the more important things. Everything he wrote was important, but the most important things are from that period. Afterwards, he was very much distracted by the Rabbanut in Yerushalayim when he became Rav of Yerushalayim, and the Rosh HaRabbanim Beretz Yisrael, and that was in Tal Resh Pei Daled, etc., and then Tafresh Tzadiyah, he passed away. So I think he was not quite 70, he was 69. I don't think he made it quite to his 70th, but I have to check, but I think so. So the picture that some people paint of Rav Kook is simply not accurate, is not precise, and is misleading. And I think this is a very serious matter.
Rabbi,
yes.
I have a few things which I want to read and then ask you a question about them.
Okay.
This one is from Tehillim, Perek Nun Tet. It's Yismach Tzadik Ki Chazan Hakam, Ta'ama V'Yichatz
B'dam Harasha.
ויאמר אדם אך פרי לצדיק,
Mhm.
יש אלוקים שופטים בארץ.
Mhm.
There's a few more I want to read. So the two in.
Hang on, let's take it one at a time. What do
One
you
at a time.
wish to say about
So
that?
we see
pasuk?
here that the tzaddik is rejoicing, standing in the blood of the Rasha.
Okay.
And we see he sees the vengeance, and he's
Mhm.
praising Hashem. It seems like a good thing to see the downfall of not Rasha, but of Rashaim and their blood.
Machon.
And there's more.
What kind? Okay, so what kind of rasha are we talking about then? I agree. There's that question. That's what it says, and I have no problem with that. Did you not rejoice in your heart when you heard that Nasrallah was taken out,
But
or others?
But what Rav Kook seems to be saying here is the ideal is to only hate the Risha and not hate the Rishayim. But that's not what the psukim seem to say. I've got many psukim which contradict this.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. It's a fair comment.
And then there's one question I want to ask you at the end. In Mishlei it says Betuv tzadikim ta'alot kirya u'ba'avod Hashem rinna. So in English, when it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices, and when the wicked perish, there is joy. Not
The evil, not the evil, but the evildoers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or the Rishayim,
Agreed.
Another pasuk, a very interesting one in Yirmiyah. Hayafoch kushi oro v'namer chabar b'rotav. Can the Cushites change their skin or the leopards their spots? Gam tuchlu leitiv l'midei areah. So you who have learned.
All right. So I think all these pasukim prove exactly what Rav Kook says here, precisely.
The ideal is to hate evil.
Yes, but did you not hear me say a short while ago that I think very few people can ever achieve that level? Certain very, very unique, special individuals may at some point achieve that level, and that insight, and that understanding, and appreciation of the Bria, so that they can hate only the Risha and not the Rishaim. But that level, that Madriga is foreign and very far removed from the vast majority of people. The Tanakh, you're quoting from the Tanakh. The Tanakh is for everybody, not for unique individuals. The average, and not just the average, the way above average Jew has to hear Ba'avod Rishaim Rina. And that has to be the line. That is the education, and that's what the Tanakh tells you. Quite right.
But the ideal then is what the Tanakh is saying, that the tzaddik will rejoice with the destruction of the evildoers, not the evil.
That doesn't. But I don't see that as a contradiction. Rav Kook is discussing things which don't belong to Reshut HaRabim. In where he discusses, he's expressing very, very advanced ideas which can only be taught and spoken of with very, very unique individuals. As I said before, I do not think that most people will ever achieve such a level, and they should not even attempt to, because it's something which comes me'elav, ziba me'elav. If a person is that kind of a person, they'll know, they'll find out when the time comes, and they'll view things in a certain way. The vast majority of people have to hear what the Tanakh tells them, as exactly as it tells them. Va'avod Rishaim Rina, Yismah Sadiq ki hazanakam, yirhas b'dam rasha. That's exactly how he should feel and what he should think.
But maybe that's the ideal then.
All right, well, so you're saying that maybe Rav Kook is mistaken, or maybe this idea that Rav Kook mentions here about the possibility of aspiring to a certain level, you're claiming maybe that's mistaken. Okay, you can claim that if you like.
I think the Rambam says that you're supposed to hate somebody who...
He does, absolutely. No, Rambam says such things more than once.
There's a machloket in between...
You're claiming there's a machloket. I'm not saying, I cannot prove to you there's no machloket. I cannot prove to you that, as I said before, we said before about Tanath Wadai and Tanath Safik. You're saying Rav Kook is mistaken, the Psukim say otherwise. You can claim that if you wish. You could also claim, or you could also suggest, that Rav Kook knew all these Psukim a great deal better than any of us know them, and yet he, on from a theological, spiritual, philosophical perspective, a person can adopt a certain attitude and an appreciation of the world, of reality, of evil in the world, and look at it from a particular way, which most people will never they'll never get. They won't be there. It's not for them, and it's a mistake to even teach such a thing to such people. Do you think that when Rav Kook wrote these things, he was writing for the average person? He wasn't. It's completely wrong to imagine such a thing. Completely misguided. Rav Kook was writing his innermost thoughts and insights for a very, very limited audience, and most people are not there and will never be there, and that's why it's a mistake to base an entire stream in the Jewish world, like the Dati Luimi world, to base it on such teachings. It's wrong, it's mistaken, it's misguided, it's unwise. What they have to be based on is, as you said, the Tanakh, the Rambam, etc. It has to be based on straightforward halachic and unequivocal sources, which are exactly the mazon haruhani, the spiritual sustenance that most people require. And I haven't got. There's another book which I haven't got here, Rav Kook, where he speaks about Rishaim also, written much earlier, written in Tal Resh Nun Zayin, 1897, Minyanam. And he also expresses himself in very harsh terms towards the evildoers and how great the divide between Jews who keep the Torah and Jews who reject the Torah is. And I'm willing to admit that if you look at all the various statements of Rav Kook over decades that he wrote, that he expressed, and you try and distill it into one clear message, you won't be able to do that. Because reality is complex. Such a person on his level can look at reality, look at certain phenomena in the world on a certain day and think about it and appreciate it in a certain way, and another time can feel it necessary to stress another angle. And all the angles are true. But you have to know what to stress and what to apply in a given situation.
There's one pasuk that he brought here, Yitamu Hatayim.
Yes.
The end of the pasuk, which is not written here, is Shaim or Denam.
That's
right. And so he seems to me to be like selectively choosing, in this pasuk, selectively choosing it. He's arguing with the Rambam, so it's not me saying Rav Kook is wrong. I'm just saying I'm looking at the pasuk, I'm looking at the Rambam. And
by the way, the simple pshat of the pasuk, Yitamu Hatta'im min ha'aretz, or Hashem al-Denam, the true pshat of the pasuk is the Hatta'im means Hatta'im.
Right.
And it's the drasha is that Hatta'im or Hatta'im. But again, you see that the pshat of the pasuk says one thing, right. The drasha in Masechet Berachot says something slightly different. There's room for both these ideas, both these perspectives. The question is, how do you weigh these things up? What do you teach to children, to teenagers, to young people? What will the message be that they hear when they go to school, when they in the drasha, and the Beth Knesset, etc., etc.? You understand? So, but again, no one is forcing you or anybody to subscribe to everything the Rav Kook wrote. You're not chayav to do that.
The way I would read Rav Kook, just personally, I would say there's two types of Rishaim. There's the types that we need to hate with a passion, like Nasrallah, and there's the type of somebody who...
So we're talking, but for arguments, for the purposes of this discussion, we're discussing Jews, not Nasrallah, and not Hamenei or what have you.
So his way, if we're discussing Jews who may not be religious, I would definitely employ that, his ideal, because that's a type of Rasha which is someone who could at any moment do teshuvah or things like that. Whereas like Nasrallah, he is...
No, but if we're talking only about Jews, then what do you do with those pesukim and or these insights of Rav Kook or that drasha and barachot? It's not so straightforward. Also, it's not monochromatic. It's a very complex picture. But again, Rav Kook is expressing his ideas. No one said that you or anyone has to accept everything that Rav Kook wrote, just as you're not required, lichora, to accept every perush that Rashi wrote, or every psak of the Rambam, or every statement of the Ramban, or of the Chazon Ish, or the Baal Shem Tov, or whoever it may be. No one is obligating you to accept all of those various statements. And usually what happens is a person feels themselves drawn more to a certain derech, a certain outlook, a certain way of looking at things. But then too, that's okay. But there has to be, even Rav Kook himself, who is known for suggesting that it's possible to view certain kinds of rish'uth or rishaim in a certain way, he himself tells you that's a more advanced approach, which is only possible much later. And I'm adding for very few people. The usual, normal, standard message has to be lisnot rashaim, and not just the risha, because it doesn't work. It cannot work, it will not work, and you certainly have to keep yourself distant from the rashaim, because as Rambam writes in Ilchot De'oth, Perek Shishi, דרך בריאתו של אדם להיות נמשך בדעותיו ובמעשיו אחר רעהו וחברו. It is human nature to be influenced by the actions of those around you, your friends, your neighbors, your community. ונוהג במנהג אנשי מדינתו, and to behave in a fashion similar to the way that people in your town, in your city, in your neighborhood behave. לפיכך, therefore, because this is the nature of human beings, and again, here also, there may be a unique and a particular individual here and there who's not influenced, who's able to, he's as it were made of Teflon, and all the evil just slips off him and it doesn't influence him. But that's very rare. Most people are not that way. The vast majority of people are not that way. Rambam says, Derech briyato shel adam is kach v'kach. That's how it is. Lefichach, sarich adam lithaber l'sadikim u'leshev etzel hachachamim. A person has to therefore make it his business to be in the society and be friends with and be in the company of tzaddikim, وَلَشَّevْ أَتْزَلَ HaChamim, and to spend time with Hachamim, Chachmei Torah, tamid, always. كَذَا شِيلْمَدْ مَعَسَيْهِمْ, to learn from what they do and what they think and what they say. وَيِتْرَحَكْ مِنْ هَرَشَّعِيمْ هَوْلْخِيمْ بَحُوشَةٍ, and to distance himself from those who do evil, who don't walk in the ways of the Torah, who literally are walking in the darkness. كَذَا شِلَوْ يِلْمَدْ مَعَسَيْهِمْ. And he goes on to say, and if a person lives in a place, if a person lives in a place where everyone is doing the wrong thing, not acting in a derech yishara, according to the Torah, he should move away. Don't stay there. He should move to a place where most people are living and behaving and think correctly and properly. And if all the places that with which he's familiar are such that they're all off the derech, what should he do? He says, as it is today. Rambam says this 850 years ago. You can only imagine what he would say today. He says, if you find yourself in a situation where all the communities and towns and countries where you can get to, where you with which you are familiar are off the derech, or he can't get to a place where people are normal, either because of the military, political situation, it's dangerous to travel, or because of illness he can't go. Yeshev levado yehidi, he should choose to live alone as a hermit. Yeshev levado yehidi, kenyan shenemar yeshev badadu yidom. If the people around him are real evildoers, like those people in Tel Aviv on Yom Kippur, אם היו רעים וחטאים שאין מניחים אותו לשב במדינה אלא אם כן נתערב עמהם ונהג במנהגם הרע, they're only willing to allow him to live amongst them and leave him in peace, and if he acts as they act and behaves as they behave, יצא למערות ולהווחים, then he should find himself a cave to dwell in and hide from and run away from all society, all human society. That's if those are the only options. Or go into the desert. And should not live among such people, because again a person is more than likely to be influenced by such things. So that's the hanhaga, that's the recommendation, that is the chinuch for all Jews. And that doesn't contradict what Rav Kook writes here at all, or anything that Rav Kook ever wrote. You think Rav Kook wanted to live? Did Rav Kook move to Kibbutz Shomer HaTzair when he lived in Eretz Yisrael? No. He didn't choose to live amongst them. He chose to live elsewhere. It's true, he went deliberately once to one of their kibbutzim, etc., to try and see if it was possible to somehow communicate with them, speak with them, influence them. He tried that. It's interesting, some people in that kibbutz where he was, I can't remember which particular place it was, I think it was in Emek Israel. It's interesting, people who were completely distant from Torah said about Rav Kook, we felt that we were in the presence of a ball of fire that had been removed from Har Sinai and had arrived in our kibbutz. In other words, they were in awe of this person, even though he was from a different planet. And they didn't really understand him at all. But there was something so powerful, so overwhelming about Rav Kook's personality, and he exuded this spiritual power, apparently, that people could say such a thing about him. We know who said it, a guy called Luz Kaddish, I think his name was, or Kaddish Luz, that was his name, Kaddish Luz, or something like that. He's quoted in writing. This is what he said about him. We saw he was an amazing individual who arrived, as it were, like a fiery image in our midst, and spent a short time with us, and went on his way. They didn't become Balei Teshuvah, but they were at least very somehow influenced or impressed, at least for that moment. But he didn't succeed in turning them around. Malasot, that's not what happened. But he certainly didn't live amongst them. Clearly not. Correct?
Do we know what the communication was there? Is there any record?
I don't know more than what I just told you. What I just told you is well known and it's recorded. I don't know more. I don't know what else went on exactly. Regarding Eliezer ben Yehuda, who sometimes came to speak to Rav Kook, Rav Kook spoke to him, and when Eliezer ben Yehuda was about to leave, he always said to him, "Ulai igi hazman shetachzor b'tshuva." He said that to him, but hu lo chazar b'tshuva. And when he died, he didn't want to have anything to do with him, and he attacked him vociferously, as I quoted to you in that letter. Well, I quoted a few lines, but it's very harsh words. So, first of all, to try to imagine that most people can try and emulate Rav Kook and perceive everything the way he perceived things, that's for the birds. That's not real. That's completely divorced from reality. And in terms of practical hadracha, Rav Kook didn't teach that. He taught that you have to understand that Risha and Rishaim go together, and this is how people have to see the world, and they have to stay far away from such people. And again, this is a major error and a very serious lacuna, I think, in the so-called Zionist religious world. In this respect, the Haredim are more correct and wiser. And the fact is that almost all of those who were close to Rav Kook remained in the Haredi world, or they attached themselves to the Haredi world. Sometimes paying a great price, but that's what they did in practice. They didn't feel themselves able to rub shoulders with the various Rishaim that were out there, and even in those days, let alone today. So we'll stop here, I think, for today.